So, without further ado, and in the style of every 1990s Star Trek The Next Generation crossover, we continue. The rain had stopped. It turned out that my estimate of 3 hours to get home had been conservative. It took closer to 6. It doesn't take anything like 6 hours to walk across our city, so you can guess that I got turned around a lot. I followed a street that looked familiar for nearly 45 minutes, expecting it to turn into the roadway for the Birdbridge Canal, which I could follow home. Then it hit a wall, literally, ran smack into the side of a church that I didn't recognize. The angel over the doorway was 8 feet tall and had a stone blindfold over her face. She looked as if she were weeping. The carving under her feet read, "Our Lady of Sorrowful Angels." I thought about going in to ask for directions, but I really wasn't in the mood to talk to any more strangers today. So I just turned around and went back, and that was probably pretty dumb. But I'd had a really lousy day, and even Our Lady of Sorrowful Angels probably wouldn't want anything to do with me. Anyway, I found the right street eventually and made it to the bird bridge, which is covered in carvings of kingfishers and oyster catchers, the edges of their wings melting away under wet green moss. Then from the Birdbridge Canal through the Taylor district, where everyone was inside or under tarps, trying to keep their wares dry, and up to Market Street, which crosses all the big canals. You can take Market pretty much anywhere, even to Aunt Tabitha's bakery, but it's a roundabout sort of way. On the other hand, if your nerves are good, or if you're in a mood for delays, you can take a shortcut from one end of Market through the crooked alley called the Rat's Elbow, and you come out less than a block from the bakery. Rat's Elbow really wasn't that bad, but it had a number of offshoots, and most of those led into the Rat's Nest, which really is all that bad. Beer is cheap, blood is cheaper, as they say in there. I don't know how much blood costs out here, come to think of it. We don't use it much in baking, but presumably it's even cheaper in the Rat's Nest. We do use beer to make the dark ale bread. Costs 6 pennies a keg from the tavern down the street, and Aunt Tabitha says that's highway robbery, but she's never suggested buying beer in the Rat's Nest. By the time I made it to the Rat's Elbow, the rain had slowed to a tentative drizzle. The sun wasn't exactly shining, but there were some bright patches of cloud. I could see them reflected in the puddles down the middle of the cobblestones. Now, here's the problem with the Rat's Elbow. Even leaving aside the name and the proximity to the Rat's Nest, the street settled badly on one side, so the road slopes sharply from the north side down to the south. The settling made the houses on the south all lean in over the road. Various generations of owners have propped up the leaning walls with wooden beams, usually wedged right up against the street, so now it's impossible to get a carriage through, and half the road is always in the shadow of the leaning buildings. Plus there's a drainage problem. Even though the rain had been stopped for a little bit, the right side of the Rat's Elbow looked like a lake, with murky water swirling around and occasionally over the front steps of the buildings. People watched me from the wet front steps. There were people on the porches and in the dark, unshuttered windows. They weren't doing anything threatening. They were playing cards and talking, and a dead-faced woman was pinning up laundry to a clothesline, standing knee-deep in brown water. Nobody said anything to me, and they didn't exactly stare. But they knew I was there. And I knew that they knew, and they knew that I knew that they knew, all in a creepy, crackling tangle of mutual awareness. It occurred to me that it was much easier to scoot through the Rat's Elbow when Aunt Tabitha was expecting me back any minute and would raise holy hell if I didn't arrive. But she had no idea where I was, and if she was going to start looking for me, she'd start back at the palace. Nobody knew where I was, except for the people in Rat's Elbow. They probably wouldn't do anything to me. They were poor, obviously. If you were rich, you don't live in Rat's Elbow. But just because you were poor didn't mean you were bad. I mean, poverty didn't mean that you were going to take an example, completely and totally at random, hit a bedraggled young woman over the head and go through her pockets to see if she had any money. It was just that it also didn't mean that you weren't. That one woman is doing laundry. Do bad people do laundry? It's not like I have anything worth stealing, but do they know that? So I walked a little faster. I could hear them talking quietly, and some kids had come out and were playing, and they got quieter when I walked by. And then it took a minute for the noise to start up again behind me. I wish Aunt Tabitha were here. I wish Uncle Alfred were here. I even sort of wish Bob was here. I don't think anybody would mess with Bob. Not twice, anyway. There was a clattering noise behind me. The skin on the back of my neck crawled. But I was not going to look around. No, I wasn't. Definitely not. Oi! Bread, go! I turned around. 2 empty eye sockets, dark as sorrow, hung a little above my head. The skeletal face swept down into long, smooth bones that framed a cavernous nasal passage stuffed with twigs. An empty jaw opened and closed with a hollow clacking. I stared into the face of a dead horse and nearly fainted with relief.
You tease.
Yup. Chapter 7. Knackering Molly was, to put it bluntly, insane. She wasn't stupid, though. There was a sharp, glittering intelligence inside the insanity that had learned early on that it was much easier to get away with being insane if you were also useful and had a little bit of money and if people were just a bit scared of you. Molly was like me, a very minor wizard, but her talent was even weirder. She could make dead horses walk. Now, this may not sound like a very good talent, but if you live in a large city with narrow streets, it's pretty handy. Horses are useful animals, but they die like everybody else, and when they're dead, they're about 1,000 pounds of meat and bone that you have to dispose of before it starts to stink. The knacker men, who run the big rendering yards at the edge of town, they'll pay money for the dead horse, but they also charge money to come take it away, and they have to roll the cart in, and the cart takes up space and disrupts traffic and blocks people's doorways, and then the people loading the horse onto the cart have to get paid, and sometimes they have to start butchering the horse right there if they can't carry it out, and it's just this horrible business with blood and nastiness everywhere, and the neighbours get very put out. Or you can get Knackering Molly, and for 6pence she'll put her hand on the horse's head and it will stand up and walk to the knackers under its own power. Now, it's still pretty horrible to watch, but it's a lot less trouble. Anyway, you can spot Molly pretty easily. She rides around the city on Nag. Nag's been dead longer than I've been alive. He's mostly bones now. So she pads him with rags and straw and old flour sacks. He looks like a magpie's nest with hooves. People are sometimes a little nervous about us magic folk. I mean, we're born this way. Nobody knows why. My parents weren't magic at all. Nobody else in the family is either. But if you start complaining about magickas, there's always a chance that the person you're talking to knows one, or is married to one, or has one in the family, and they will get annoyed about it. And it's not like everyone advertises their ability. Presumably, some people have talents so obscure they never get to use them. There's a fairy tale, actually, about a girl who could talk to tornadoes, which would be pretty impressive, but we haven't had a tornado in River Braid in 100 years, so I mean, how often does it really come up? We're lucky here, though. Our city's really nice about magickas. Other than holding bits of iron in court, they don't treat you differently. Some cities don't allow magickas to live there at all, or make them register with the government. Delta City has the Spell Quarter, which is kind of a ghetto like the Rat's Nest, only just for wizards. None of that happens here in River Braid. If you're going to be a magicka, this is the place to live. If you're a wizard who can do big, scary, impressive things, you usually wind up in the army or working for the Duchess. Nobody really wants to live next to someone who can summon lightning out of the sky. The rest of us, who do little, small, not very impressive things, usually go out of our way to act harmless and useful, so that people don't start making signs to warn off bad luck when we walk around. Knackering Molly doesn't care about any of that. If people make signs against bad luck when Nag trots by, she figures it's good advertising. Molly is the only other magicka, other than Master Elwich, that I talk to regularly. There's a girl at the farmer's market, and we nod to each other, but that's as far as it goes. I think most magic folk don't want to talk about it, and maybe they think that making gingerbread dance is a little too flamboyant. Although nobody is as flamboyant as Knackering Molly. Hi, Molly. I patted Nag's nose. The bones are so old they're not icky anymore, just dry and smooth. The rags are still pretty icky. There's not very much to Nag, but Molly once told me that he liked having his nose petted. So I try. What are you doing in the elbow, Duck? Asked Molly, nudging Nag into a walk beside me. Trying to get home, I said wearily. Nag's hooves went clonk, clonk, clonk on the pavement. Regular horse hooves go clop. Please don't ask me why Nag's went clonk. She peered down at me, her lined face drawing even more lines as she frowned. If you don't mind me saying so, love, you look like the arse end of a seagull. Which is pretty insulting if you think about it. But
Sorry.
You're right.
Arse end of a seagull is a hell of a compliment.
Which is pretty insulting if you think about it, but perversely it made me feel better. When you feel absolutely wretched, it's consoling to know that you look just as awful as you feel. Your uncle's not dead, is he now? Saw the body wagon at your aunt's place. No, my uncle's fine. I kept walking. People weren't staring now. Apparently, a girl walking through the elbow was unusual, but a girl with a mad woman riding a dead horse was perfectly acceptable. There was probably a moral lesson in there somewhere, but I'd given up on morals for the day. There was a dead girl in the bakery. Ah, said Knackering Molly. Who killed her? They thought I did it. I said gloomily. Did ya? No! Well then. She sat back. You're a good girl. You probably have a good reason. I ain't judging. But if you didn't do it, who did? I don't know. My shoes squelched. Nag went through a puddle and splashed water up the side of my trousers. She sent a man out from the palace. Said something about her death being magic. Magic? Molly threaded her hands into Nag's rags. No good come a poking round in death magic, Duck. Says the woman riding the dead horse, I thought, but did not say. I don't know. I had nothing to do with it. I went up to the palace and saw the Duchess. It occurred to me as I was saying it that it should have been very exciting. Seeing the Duchess, even with everything else, she'd actually spoken. To me. She'd been distant and busy, but she'd kept me from getting thrown in jail. I wasn't excited, though. I was just bone tired. And honestly, still a little mad. Molly didn't say that it shouldn't have been exciting. She only said, again. And then after a minute, there's a thing, anyway. She told them to let me go. Well, I mean, she talked to a wizard, and I guess he told her. Wizards! Knackering Molly leaned over Nag's withers and spat on the ground. We're wizards? I said mildly. Not like real wizards, Duck. We're just little people, you and me. She slapped Nag's skeletal shoulder. The big wizards? Well now, the government wizards. You stay clear of them, bread girl. They're no good for nobody. They're worse for people like us. They say some wizards came around once, when Molly was young, to ask her if she could make dead people walk, probably thinking that if she could make dead soldiers get up and fight, she'd be worth a lot to the right people. She doesn't talk about that. Miss McGrammer said that she couldn't do it, but I heard Bruce the Chandler say once that he thought she had been able to do it, and that's why she came back crazy. Even if she just made the cavalry horses get up and charge again, they would have shoved her out on a battlefield to do it, and how awful would that have been? I wanted to ask her more about it, I wanted to ask him more about it, but all he'd say was that she hadn't been any crazier than anybody else before the wizards took her away. She hates the government now. Mutters about that a lot, but then again she also mutters that the fleas are the ghosts of ancient philosophers and they're trying to suck out the truth from her ankles. This doesn't stop her from driving a very hard bargain when you want a horse moved, though. People have tried to take advantage of it because they think she's not right in the head. It does not end well for them. Lord Ethan's okay, I said, remembering that golden, glittering presence in the audience chamber and the way he'd smiled at me I mean, I think he told her I couldn't have done it. Yeah. Molly was unconvinced. Waves in parades, maybe, but he's a war wizard right enough. Maybe he did you a good turn now, but he'll kill you if you get in his way. Not out of meanness, like some of them, but just like a bug. She rooted in her bird's nest hair for a minute and pulled out some small wiggly thing. Like a bug. Her thumbnail came down and cracked it. At least he's not mean, I said faintly. Lord Ethan could call storms out of the sky to slam the enemy flat. The songs the minstrels sing on street corners said he could control the lightning, but I couldn't imagine him crushing somebody like a bug. Mean or not, you're still dead, Bread Girl. She straightened up. And here we are, almost done. Oh, oh. I looked around, surprised. We'd emerged from the Rat's Elbow onto the street, and I hadn't even noticed. Oh, thank you. Knackering Molly shrugged. Rat's Elbow's not as bad as some places, but you gotta walk careful, right? Never hurts to have a friend with you, even if it's just old Nag. She leaned down over the dead horse's neck and gestured. Come here, Bread Girl. Somewhat reluctantly, I came. I was grateful for her escort, but, I mean, she was still insane, and more importantly, she stank to high heaven. Most of it was unwashed woman and unwashed cloth, but there was a distinct reek of the knacker yard clinging to her as well. Word of advice, she hissed, leaning close in. I tried really hard not to flinch, expecting her breath to stink as bad as the rest of her, but it was unexpectedly sweet, like mint. You walk careful, Bread Girl. Little people like us, we're not safe these days. Watch your back. What? Her eyes stabbed into mine. You look out for the spring green man. I blinked. Who? Molly leaned back and put her heels into Nag, and he turned as neatly as a parade mount and clattered back into Rat's Elbow. It didn't occur to me until after she'd gone that I should run after her, maybe ask her what she'd heard, or who the spring green man was supposed to be, or even what any of this meant. But I was only a block from the bakery, and it had been a long, long day. Chasing a madwoman on a dead horse into the bad part of town just didn't seem worth the effort right now, you know? Particularly since her spring green man was probably just another figment of her imagination, like the truth-sucking fleas. Still, the name made me uneasy, somehow, in a way that the fleas never did. Stupid. I muttered to myself, folding my arms tight and hurrying towards the bakery. Stupid name. Stupid inquisitor. Stupid long day.
Necromancy. Neigh.
Neuroprancer.
Neuroprancer.
Neuroprancer was the winner for me.
Nice.
I very nearly saw Neuroprancer at the exact wrong time, so perfect. That is she hydrated until she dehydrated. Chapter 8. When I walked in the door, Aunt Tabitha made all the proper noises and sat me down with a mug of hot tea and made me tell the story 3 times, and then snapped at Uncle Albert to stop pestering me about it. Couldn't he see I was exhausted? The only thing he'd said all afternoon was, "Good heavens," and sent me home. The girl was gone out of the bakery anyway. Presumably the body wagon had come and taken her. I didn't ask. I did ask if Aunt Tabitha wanted me to set the bread out to rise overnight, but she said that she'd been running the bakery for 20 years and she could manage just this once and that I should get some sleep. So I went back to my room. The rain had come back in spurts and spatters, and the cobblestones gleamed wetly. They were lighting the streetlights already, but the lamplighter hadn't gotten this far yet, so the street was dark and gloomy. That didn't matter. It was only 6 doors down, barely a block. I could have walked it blindfolded. You'd think after a day like that I would have been jumpy and paranoid. I really wasn't. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just watching my feet go one in front of the other, and then somebody grabbed me from out of the dark. "Where is she?"
Really?
Yes, a voice snarled in my ear, and I was wrenched off the street and into the shadows of the alleyway. "Sweet Lady of Angels, is this day never going to end?" I should probably have been scared, No, I should definitely have been scared. Mostly, though, I was just tired. I wanted to go home. I wanted to go back to my warm little room over the glassblower's shop and lie down in the bed and pull a quilt over my head and go to sleep and wake up stupidly early and go make cinnamon rolls and apple pull-aparts and Gingerbread Man. Where's who? Tippy, said the voice in my ear, sounding frustrated and also surprisingly high-pitched. I'll go back and do that again. Tippy, said the voice in my ear, sounding frustrated and also surprisingly high-pitched. What did you do with her? Who's Tibby? I tried wriggling. There was an arm around my neck and it was making it hard to breathe, but my attacker seemed to be shorter than I was and wasn't getting a very good angle. Let me go! Not until you tell me where Tibby is! I don't know who that is! I grabbed for the arm around my neck. Stop it! Stop it! I'm warning you! The voice was definitely shrill, and I was slapped against the side of the building. Bricks scraped against my hands. Let me go! I got my fingers around the arm, bent forward as far as I could, and pulled. Now, this wouldn't have worked in most cases, but I had two things going for me. One, I was a baker, and you don't punch dough every day for 2 years without developing some pretty hefty forearms. I may not be very big, but I'll bet you a tray of cinnamon buns I can out arm wrestle any girl my age. Two, my attacker was a 10-year-old boy. I wrenched away, turned, and faced him. He wasn't big. My neck was probably about the highest he could reach. He was wiry, but he looked skinny and underfed, like a stray dog. His eyes were way too big for his face, and the grime on his face was marked by tear tracks. Where is she? He demanded again, sounding furious and miserable. He bounced on the balls of his feet, apparently not sure if he should launch himself at me again or run away. Where's who? Tibby! He said, practically yelling. My sister! Why do you think I know? She was in your bakery! I closed my mouth with a snap. Oh no. I leaned against the wall next to him. The mad was gone. I was just so tired. Tell me what happened, I said, finally pinching the bridge of my nose. When did she go into the bakery? Last night, said the boy, snuffling and wiping his nose on the back of his hand. She went in last night, but she didn't come out again. What did you do with her? There was a question I wasn't willing to answer just yet. Why did she go into the bakery? It was cold. We were hungry. There's good food in there. Sometimes. He glared at me, daring me to say anything. We're going back sometimes. Take a few buns. Not stuff. We don't nick stuff. Thank you. Now, the parish priest would probably argue that stealing was stealing, whether it was day-old buns or Aunt Tabitha's good knives. But you know what? The priest wasn't here. I could understand the difference just fine. Food was one thing. Good knives were hard to replace. I wondered how long they'd been breaking into the bakery. I wondered why none of us had noticed. We didn't touch nothing, he said, as if reading my mind. We're careful. If we nick stuff, you put up locks and guards and whatever, and then we couldn't get buns whenever we want some. Now, there was a certain logic to that, and I decided to let it go. So Tibby went in. About when was this? I don't know, about midnight. I was going to go in too, but she said no, she'd do it quick. She was sneaking, you know. Then what happened? The boy shrugged. Then the other man showed up. Wait, what other man? You know, your uncle or whoever. The one in the yellow-greeny outfit. The notion of Uncle Alfred wandering around after midnight, going into the bakery by the back door, was odd. The notion of him wearing anything but baker's whites or threadbare black was ridiculous. Uncle Alfred had strictly monochromatic taste, probably because of Aunt Tabitha and her house dresses. Look out for the spring green man, Molly had said. That couldn't have been my uncle. Who was it? How should I know? It's your bakery. I pinched the bridge of my nose. So this man went into the bakery. Yeah. The boy snuffled again and stared up into the gloomy eaves above us. Then what happened? He came out, and then you went in a while later, and there was a whole ruckus, and I couldn't get close enough to see what was happening, and then they came and took you away. I remembered that bit. I sighed. Oh, okay. Look, they took a dead body out of the bakery. Must have been your sister. I'm so sorry. There was probably a better way to tell him the news, but I was just so horribly tired. He stared at me for a moment, then snorted, and that was not the response I was expecting. Don't be stupid. Be patient, I told myself. Be kind. He just lost his sister. He's in shock. She's not dead. You're stupid. I am not as good a person as I should be because I kind of wanted to slap him. I'm sorry, I said instead. You're wrong, he said. He turned away and I expected him to stomp off, but he turned back suddenly. Show me. Show you what? The bakery. Show me. She must still be in there, or maybe she slipped out again. Maybe she left me a sign. Okay. I shoved my hands in my pockets. I wanted to go to bed. I really, really wanted to go to bed. Now, when it's real dark, I don't want to be explaining to a lot of grown-ups. They'll be stupid about it too. Okay, I pointed up the stairs. I live up there. Come get me when it's late enough for you, and I'll show you. He nodded once, sharply, and then pelted out of the alley as if there were zombie crawfish after him.
You think that's a good place to stop, or do you want to do one more chapter?
I feel like one more.
Okay, let's do one more chapter.
Let Mona sleep challenge. It's
Hold
like
on a second, we have to lighten the mood because... I don't know what that was, but it was fun. This poor little boy.
Poor kid. I was asleep as chapter 9. I was asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow, and approximately 5 seconds later, someone was shaking me awake. I opened my eyes. It was the boy again. When he saw I was awake, he stepped back and folded his arms. Come on, it's nearly midnight. It is, really? I sat up and squinted at the window. Sure enough, deep dark outside. I'd slept for hours. It didn't feel like it at all. My head was pounding. I was starving. Although I had a distinct memory of having wolfed down a couple of cold cinnamon rolls before I fell into bed. I also had a distinct memory of locking the door. How did you get in here? He looked at me, and then at the door, and then back at me, with the sort of pure disdain that only someone under the age of 12 can manage. I knocked first, he said. You didn't answer. Any doubts I'd had about him breaking into the bakery were gone. Aunt Tabitha had bought a very sturdy lock for my door since I was living alone, and I wondered how long it had taken him to jimmy it. Fine. I swung my feet onto the floor. You hungry? He shrugged, which is a yes. There's some buns on the table. I got up and dug through my clothes chest, looking for a sweater. By the time I'd found one and pulled it over my head, there was one bun left. The kid, whatever his name was, had gone through them, apparently without chewing. Or breathing. He'd also left me one, even though he was obviously starving. What's your name? I asked, tearing into the last roll. He eyed me suspiciously. Suspicion and disdain actually appeared to be his only 2 expressions. No, wait, I'd seen anger when he first attacked me. 3 expressions. Look, you don't have to tell me your real name if you don't want to. I just want something to call you other than, hey, you. I'm Mona. Spindle, he said finally. I doubted that his mother had named him that. Still, he was as tall and thin as a spindle, and nearly as sharp. I decided to go with it. Okay, Spindle. I brushed crumbs off my front. Let's go. Opening the bakery at midnight felt like we were breaking into it, even though I worked there and would normally be doing exactly the same thing in about 4 hours. I shut the door nervously, leaned against the big oven. The banked warmth was a relief from the chill outside. She was on the floor, just here, I said, pointing to a spot in the middle of the floor. I think Aunt Tabitha probably cleaned it, though. I was trying to be tactful. Aunt Tabitha had definitely mopped up because there wasn't an enormous blood stain anymore. Spindle examined the kitchen with an almost professional detachment. He examined the counters and the floor, even the ceiling. I was almost sorry that we cleaned up, because he was doing a much more thorough job than the constables had. Finally, he went down on his knees on the floor, peering under the table. My stomach quivered. He was kneeling right where his sister's blood had pooled all over the floor. I wanted to tell him to move, but, I said with no real idea how to continue. There's something under here, he interrupted. There is? I crouched down next to him. I had to put a hand down to steady myself right where the girl's head had been. Look, you have to stop this. You're going to be working here for years, maybe the rest of your life if you inherit the bakery, and if you do this every time you walk across the floor. I forcibly shoved away the memory and leaned down. Sure enough, there was something under there, some bit of metal, winking in the lantern light. It might just be some silverware, I said. It's not, Spindle said. It's something else. I don't know if I can reach it. He wedged his arm under the table up to the shoulder. Almost. Should be. No. He pulled back, frowning and dusting flour off his clothes. Can we move the table? I've got a better idea. I cracked open the door to the front and slipped through. There should still be a gingerbread man left from the last batch, and yup. It was starting to get stale, which made it harder to animate, and my headache came roaring back full force, but I gritted my teeth and stared down and thought, live. The gingerbread man stood up on my palm, stretching. I sat him down on the floor. There's something under the table, I told it. Will you go get it for me? The gingerbread man saluted, ducked his head, it was a tight fit, even for a cookie, and walked under the table. Spindle's eyebrows had vanished under his hair. You're a wizard, he said. His tone wasn't accusing, it was just surprised. It was my turn to shrug. Only with dough, I said. It's not very useful. He nodded. Tibby's a wizard. Really? She sneaks, he said, making a wiggling hand gesture that could have meant anything. You know, I didn't, but presumably she had some kind of magical talent for hiding. Do you mean that she turns invisible or something? Just about, said Spindle proudly. Me, I've got no magic. I've got to just stay low and quiet. But she can hide in a cat's shadow, almost. That was interesting. Not a huge wizarding talent, maybe, but a pretty good one compared to Bread. Knackering Molly's words suddenly came back to me. Little people like us, we're not safe. Had she meant little wizards? Minor magical talents. She warned me about the Spring Green Man too, and here Spindle had seen somebody in yellow-green trap his sister in my bakery, and then there was a dead wizard girl. A rash of wizard murders, the Inquisitor had said. I'd assumed he meant murders by wizards, but maybe that's just what he was hoping people would think. There's something going on, I said, hugging myself. Somebody's killing wizards. The Inquisitor said it. And knackering Molly. They must have gotten your sister. Spindle scowled. Somebody's killing wizard folk, all right. Words all over the street, but they didn't get Tibby because Tibby's not dead. I didn't have anything to say to that. The gingerbread man emerged from under the table, pushing the metal object. It was some kind of bracelet. A half moon of silver joined by a chain. The chain was broken and clinked as Spindle picked it up. In the pale light of the lantern, his face turned the colour of old cheese. Tibby's bracelet, he said. It was our mum's. I'm sorry, I said. He turned and ran out of the bakery. I called his name, but he wasn't a dog. He didn't come back. I stood there in the doorway for a while, the gingerbread man on my shoulder, staring out into the dark streets and the splash of yellow radiance the streetlight left across the stones. I'd known it was Tibby. It was better Spindle knew it too. It was better to know than not to know. Not knowing was terrible. Something patted my cheek. I looked down and saw the gingerbread man on my shoulder. He was steadying himself with a hank of hair in one hand, and with the other he reached up and caught the tears I hadn't known I was crying. And we'll leave it there.